And welcome to the Covered with Wax tutorial. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create the illusion that something is covered with wax and it's just melting off. You can use any object, and this is really just a special effect that you can use for just about anything. But I decided to use this doorknob here, so it looks like you're trying to grab the doorknob and it's just melting, and But let's go ahead and get started here. Let's go into the Adobe Bridge and I can show you the files that we have. We have the stock image over here that we will be using. We also have a completed covered with waxed.psd file, so you can use that for reference. So you can just go through there and look at that and check out the layers and everything. And down here we just have the file that contained the color that we will be using for the wax, and you can use that. So to start off here, let's go ahead and open up the stock image that's right here, and you can follow right along. And what I'll do is just move this image out of the way, and I will zoom into the stock image here. Alright, and the first thing that I'm going to do is create a adjustment layer for this background, which is going to be a brightness and contrast adjustment layer, because I'm going to adjust the brightness of the image just a little bit to help lower the background brightness a little bit. That way the wax will stand out more on top of the background. So what I'm going to do is hold down the Alt key, and you can hold down Option if you're on the Mac, and I would click on this button right here, and let's just select brightness contrast right here, almost going off the screen there, but I'm going to put a check in this box right here, use previous layer to create clipping mask, and I will go ahead and click OK, and I will just lower the brightness down a little bit, and I can come back to this anytime. I'm going to turn up the contrast to, we can enhance the highlights just to remove that little bit of haze that we see, but I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now let's go up here to select all, and over here to edit, down here to copy merged. And what I'm going to do is paste a copy of this adjusted layer here on top of the image adjustment. So I'm going to go over here to edit, paste, and what we've also done is we've made a copy of our original, and so we don't want to work off the original background, just in case, if we make a mistake or we need to go back or do something with the original layer. I always like to make a copy or work off the copy anyway. But so let's just name this, I'll just put door. We're not going to directly work off this door layer because I like to keep all the original contents for this layer. If it's an object or something that you have that you would like to cover with wax, leave the layer just the way it is by itself, and then make a new layer on top of that, and then make the adjustments to that layer to affect the original layer. So in this case, our door would be our original. And what I'm going to do is make a new layer above that door layer, and I'm just going to rename this layer by double clicking on the name there, and I'll just call this wax color. There we go. And I'll press enter on the keyboard, and let's go back into the covered wax folder here, and let's open up our wax color. And this is just to make it a little bit easy for you. We can sample the color from this image here, and you can see I've already done this, but I'll reset the foreground and background there for you. But if you select the eyedropper tool in the toolbar, you can click on this image to sample the color, and then click over back on this image over here, and then select the paintbrush on the toolbar. And I will just right click to make this brush just a little bit larger, and probably try just about somewhere around 50% for the hardness. Then you can just come in here and paint on the object that you would like to wax. So I'll just paint over this doorknob. If I need to, I can lower the softness a little bit. Or I'm sorry, I got that backwards. I want to increase the hardness on that. There we go. And then I'll go around the knob here. Just like this. Doesn't have to be perfect, because since we're making this layer for the wax color only, it's very simple to erase away areas that if we if I go outside of the doorknob like that, well, I can just undo it, or I can just use the eraser tool and go back and touch things up later on. But that's pretty much what you want to create using the brush with the wax color. And so after we've done this, all we have to do on this wax color layer here, let's just select hard light, and that will blend it in and change the doorknob there to that color. And if you see anything else like around it that you may want to touch up, just zoom into it real quick. And if you look closely, you can see that I've came outside of the doorknob. Well, that's pretty easy to do. All we have to do is just, we can select a hardness. Let's see, we turn up the hardness just a little bit. Right on the edge here, I can just erase away. And I think on this eraser, the opacity's turned down. So let me turn that up to 100% and then come back. And that will touch up the edge there a little bit. You see that? Because I think we did start a little bit soft on the brush. But now, I'll go back and touch that up. Okay, there we go. Don't have to go too crazy with that. Okay. Good. Now let's go into the next step here. Let's make another new layer. And I'll double click on that. And let's call this Smudge and Drips. And I'll press enter. Okay. And this is the fun part. This is probably one of the more or most difficult parts of this tutorial. It's, it just takes a little bit of practice. But over here on the toolbar, I want you to select the Smudge tool right here. And let's see how large the brush is right now. This looks pretty good. And we can start off with no hardness on the brush. I can just turn that all the way down. And the strength, 90% may work just fine. And what I'll do is zoom in to the doorknob. And what we want to do is soften this doorknob. And before you start to smudge, make sure that Sample All Layers is checked at the top on the options bar. And what you want to do is just smudge on the area or object that you would like to turn into wax. So you can see what I'm doing right here. It's where you click and then you just move the brush very slightly, and that will smooth it. And I will just go through here. I'm going to go through and smudge this entire doorknob here. Now, since we're using the Sample All Layers option to smudge, well, we've just placed all the smudges on one layer. So if I make this invisible here, we can see that all the smudging is going on one layer. And it's a good idea to make sure that you at least smudge most of the area around the object. And then what I'll do now is go ahead and save the image. Okay, we'll just call this Covered with Wax Video, just to tell me that this is the one we did during the video. Great. Alright, so we've completely smudged this layer. We will also be adding the drips to this layer as well, creating the drips for the wax. Now, while we're still on this layer, we're going to use the Smudge Tool once more to create the drips. So first, let's make sure that we don't have Sample All Layers checked. So I'll just go ahead and uncheck that. And for the strength, we can leave this at 90%, or you can go somewhere between 90 and 95% will work fine. And if I right-click on the image, let's make sure this hardness is turned all the way up, somewhere around 95%. And what I'm going to do is use the brackets on the keyboard to adjust the size of the brush. If you would like to get a little bit more intricate, then you'll need to right-click and adjust the size of the brush from right here. So what I'll do is just use the zoom tool, and let's just zoom into the doorknob here. I'll select the Smudge Tool. I'll lower the brush size. Now, when you're creating a drip, you'll want to almost work your way into the drip. I wouldn't necessarily say to come in here and start dragging down like this so fast. What I would do is almost work your way into the drip. So what I mean by that is just to pull out the area next to where the drip begins. Something like this. So the wax is coming down and then it starts to drip. And you can hold down the Shift key and that will help you get a nice straight drip line there. You see that? So I guess we can go ahead and make this first drip a little bit thick. And then what I'll do, if you see right next to the drip, you can see it's a very defined edge there. Well, what we're going to want to do is pull or smudge just at the top here. And I could probably turn down the hardness a touch. So it's something like this. So it's just a little rounded off there. You see that? Same with over here. So it looks like that drip is just gradually coming off. Great. There you go. And we're going to create the highlights and those types of things later on. So right now we just want to focus on the drips. So let's go ahead and drip away. And I will select the Smudge Tool and come in here. Now I will go to the top and make that gradual. Might be a good idea to define the ends of these strips here by just smudging them a little bit so they're not so soft on the ends. That looks good. And what I can do is probably turn the strength up to 95. And if I do that, then we could probably get a longer drip. Look at that. And I'll define the very edge here. Okay, good. Now I'll move right over here. And now if I want to, I can enlarge the brush size so it's a little bit larger there. And then just to create some type of difference here. And it looks like that I didn't have any smudging there. Yeah. So what I can do is check the sample all layers and create some smudging around in this area here. And that'll allow us to work off that. Now let's take a look at it. There we go. And so what I'll do is turn this off, and then I'll come back in here. And let's make another drip. That is a little bit bright there. So I'll just make that a little bit shorter. There we go. And I'll lower the brush size. And you don't have to go brush, or you don't have to go drip crazy. You know, whatever you think that looks more realistic to you. And we can do something like where a drip looks like it's about to start, but it just sort of just stops at one spot here. And it's a good idea to zoom out of your work here so you can see what you're doing. Because sometimes if you're a little bit too close, it's hard to imagine what it looks like. And there we go. And smooth a couple of these areas out here. Just going to zoom in. That's why it's important to make sure that you're covering the entire object when you're smudging, because there's some areas here that I did not cover, but that's okay because I knew where I was going to have the drips. So if you know where you're going to have the drips, so just make sure that those areas are smudged. Just going to come back in here, and what we're going to do, let's see, I could add a drip up here, something like this. And I'll hold down Shift just to make sure that's nice and straight. And then I'll come in here next to the top of this drip and smooth these out a little bit around here. There we go, almost like a little shadow there on the edge of that drip. And it looks like to me this one right here is a little bit dark, so what I'm going to do is go into Quick Mask and turn down the hardness. And I'm just going to adjust the brightness of this drip right here just a little bit. There we go. That way I have just a little bit more balance. So whatever you need to do while you're making these drips, you can do anything. Just use any of the tools in Photoshop to get the effect just right. Okay. And now let's go ahead and make another new layer. So down here, and we're going to call this soft highlights. There we go. And for this, we're going to use the paintbrush. So go ahead and select the paintbrush. And let's set this brush to about 5%. And then for the color, you can use white if you want to. But what I like to do is I like to sample some of the drips here, or the color that's already there, and then make a brighter color of that color. So it's not necessarily white, but it does have a little bit of color in there. Something like this. There we go. And it's just a brighter version of what's already here. And that's too close, so. And I'll just select that brush, and I can come through here, lower the opacity, and with the hardness at 0%, since this will, or these will be very light highlights. And if you find that it's just not strong enough, you can go ahead and turn those up a little bit. I can maybe go about 8%. So it's just a little bit more noticeable. And the trick here is when you have a low, or you're painting with a low opacity, is you can paint over what you're doing. And that will make it come through. You can see if I just go down here like this, but if I paint over my paint, you can see it start to come back. And I'll probably do this part a little bit different. There we go. Since we did touch this up, or we darkened it. And I'm just coming through here and adding little highlights to blend in with these strips. And these are the highlights that they're not too bright, they're just very light. They're actually very dark, but we will be adding the sharper highlights later on. I don't know if I want that drip so bright, but I'm going to come over here and these strips do look a little bit rough around the edges, but I can go back and fix those. Probably a little bit rougher than I like. If you want to create a straight line with the brush or stroke, you can click in one spot and then hold down Shift and then go to the other, or where you want to go, where you want to make this stroke. Go to the very end and then click again. And see that you'll paint right over it. I can do that again. Click, and then I'll go to the point where I want that stroke to end. Hold down Shift, and I can click again. And again, you can just barely see the highlights here. But if you see, if you just keep painting over like this, you eventually notice the difference. And these highlights are so trippy. Look at this. You can see this is before, and I'll zoom in. This is before, and now this is after. And then we will continue with these highlights up above here. So I'll select this brush and I'll come through here. And I can make this just a little bit larger. So don't be afraid to enlarge that brush a little bit. And I want to focus mostly on keeping the highlights over on this side of the doorknob, because this is where the light is hitting the doorknob on this side over here. Look at that. And what I think I'll do right now is grab or select the smudge layer with the smudge tool, and I'll turn this hardness up a little bit. And I'm going to come through here and smooth out these smudges just a little bit, because it's a very jagged edge there. And I do not like jagged edges, I tell you. There we go. I make this just a little bit smaller. Okay, good. And I can pull it down in some spots if I have removed too much. I want to smudge it out just a little bit. There we go. So that looks much better. There we are. And so it's starting to look a little bit waxy. Well, let's go ahead and add the hard highlights or the sharp highlights layer. So I will make a new layer and we'll call this sharp highlights. Now for the sharp highlights, we're going to use the brush, and we are going to set the opacity here, maybe somewhere around 50%. But we're also going to want to go into the brush preset over here. It's the brushes palette where all the presets are located, but we can also modify the brush as well. So if you click on Shape Dynamics, and right here where it says Control, turn on the control to fade, and with the minimum diameter to 0%, you can adjust the fade amount right here. This is the important value area that you want to use right here. And I will turn the hardness up to maybe somewhere around 95% and lower the brush size. And then what I'll do is zoom in, and I can click once like here and then hold down Shift, and you can create a highlight like this. Now that doesn't look right because the brush is too large. So let me just lower the diameter of that using the brackets on the keyboard. And let's try that again. And click, move up here, and you can create something like that. But it looks like to me that the fade needs to be enhanced, so I'm going to turn that up to 80, or even go 90 on the fade. And then I can come back here, click, and then hold down Shift and create something like this. I'm just going to turn this down just a little bit. There we go. And I can click here. And I will probably come back and touch up these highlights. There we go. Wanted to get that drip straight there. And that looks good. For the longer drips, I can increase the fade. We can go just all the way up to 100. 100 for the value, or you can go even larger if you want, 140. It might even be too much there. We'll go 130. And I'll click down here and then move my mouse all the way, move the brush all the way up to the top, hold down Shift, and you can see that it will pull that highlight all the way up. And I'm going to go back and retouch all these, so I'm not being too fussy on where these highlights start and begin and all that. Turn that down to 4 pixels. There we go. Add something like this. Actually, that's a little bit thicker, so use the brackets to increase that. There we go. Then what I can do is use the eraser and come through here with the hardness all the way down. I can soften the edges where the highlights begin there. Just paint on each side of them. There we go. And I can also lower the opacity of the layer as well, if you like to adjust how much or how bright those highlights are. But what I'm going to do is come over here and continue with these highlights. There we go. That might even be a little bit too thick. So I'm just going to lower the brush size. There we go. It looks like I could have added a little bit more highlight on these. So I'm just going to turn off the fade here for a second. And it's difficult sometimes when you have certain projects that are you can just get very creative with them, and when you're creating a step-by-step tutorial, you know, you get a different result every time for projects like this. So may not always turn out the same way that I did it originally. It can be a little bit different. And things can happen that were not planned, but I can come in here and just touch these up while I show you this. And I figured if you watch me work on this, then you could learn how to do it or pick up little things that will help you out. There we go. And I see little things here and there that I would like to go change, but I'm not going to really focus on those things right now. I'm going to come up on the top of this with the sharp highlights layer. And I'll probably turn down that to 50%. And increase this. I'm going to click and just right along the very top of this just a little bit. Something like that. There we go. If you look closely on the detail of this doorknob, we do have some highlights on here. Now we can paint on these, but it'll be very difficult because these are very fine lines. So what you can do is click on the smudge strips and then select the eraser. And then you can erase away a little bit. So I'll need to lower the opacity of this to 20%. And I got to click back on that smudge layer there. But if you come through here, you can click and erase away, bringing back some of that original detail. But not too much, though, because you want to have that waxed type look still. There we go. And I'm just going to come here on these sharp highlights and touch these up. I'm just using the eraser tool to come through here and make a few touch-ups. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And we can see that this is our original. And you see that I've adjusted the lighting and stuff on this one. But if you look closely, there's something that sort of bothered me when I did this originally. And if you look, it looks like there's no shadow underneath this doorknob, or there may not need to be one, but just to help it pop out a little bit more, make it look a little bit more realistic, so maybe we have some shadows from the drips. Well, what we can do is click on the door layer right here. What I'll do is make a new layer, and let's just call this shadow. That way we're not working directly off the door layer there. But what I'll do is increase the brush size, and what we're doing here is just making a large soft brush so we can create this shadow through here. And you can see that just enhances the effect a little bit. This is before and this is after. Now it looks like that wax stuff there just pops out. Look at that. Also, as a last technique, what you can do is click on the smudge and drips layer, and you can create an adjustment layer for this, like brightness and contrast, and you can adjust the brightness of this. And I noticed that we did use a brightness and contrast on the original door image, so just to make that match, make the wax match with the back, we can use, or we can adjust the brightness and contrast here just to get rid of that haze. You can see here's his before, and we can make those blacks or those shadows in the door darker and make the highlights a little bit more prominent there. And if you've smudged the entire doorknob, or if you've smudged the entire object completely, you can use the hue and saturation to change the color. So you can change the color of the wax to whatever you want, really. Or you can lower the color of it. And this doesn't have to be wax. It can be anything. It could be chocolate. You could make it look like the doorknob's just melting off. And so there's really a lot of things you can do with this. But that is just the basic process on how this is created. You know, I can spend a little bit more time making this, you know, a little bit better here, but as far as the steps on how to do this, you can just take this and do whatever you want. All right. So that's how we can wax objects in Photoshop with the covered waxed tutorial, and have fun with that. And we'll see you on the next video.